Hey everyone, Zach here, and welcome to the 47th lesson of this RTS tutorial series. In this video, we will be setting up our resource maximums. That said, fire up your editor and let's get started.
So, as some of you are aware, the way I've been running these tutorials is focused more on the logic used and not so much on object-oriented programming. Now, that said, I am going to continue to focus on the logic, but I'm going to offer a challenge to people who are more keen to try something a bit harder, who feel comfortable or competent enough to try it. And that is to update what we're going to do in this video to a more object-oriented approach. So what we're going to do in this video will work on its own, but the first half can very easily be updated to an object-oriented approach. If you're not comfortable doing that, don't worry. What we're going to do will work. So what we're going to do is we are going to have our buildings that handle resource management in terms of our max resources actually set the limit of our max resources. We are going to also handle what happens when a unit that's harvesting resources returns to a building and they're over the limit that can be handled. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our player controller and we are going to set our max resources. Alright, so we're going to create a new function. And this new function will be, well, set max resources. Now, it's very important to note the way we're going to set this function up, it can only be run after update building list has been ran. If update building list has not been used, then this function will not run. If update building list has been run, but there are new resource management buildings added in, then when this is run again, if that update building list hasn't been run, then it's going to give you wrong numbers. Alright, that said, so just make a note of that. In fact, I am going to make a tooltip of that this should only be run after update building list has been run. Alright, so let's go into our resources, and I'm going to get this max resource here, and I'm going to just rename this as my max wood resource, and then I'm going to duplicate it, and the duplicate will be my max ore resource, and I'm also going to get rid of the typos in that. There we go. And then I'm going to duplicate it one more time. And this will be my default resource max. So default resource max. I'm going to compile. And these three new variables, so my default resource max, my wood or max wood resource, and my max ore resource, I'm all going to set to have a default value of 1500. Okay, now I'm going to do something. It's going to go against what I've normally done and what you've normally seen me do, and I'll explain why once we get through this entire blueprint, or this entire function, but before I give the challenge. Okay, so I'm going to take my max wood resource. I'm going to set it here. So far, this is pretty normal for me. I'm going to take my max ore resource, and I'm going to set it right after. So far, again, nothing out of the ordinary. Now what I'm going to do different is I'm going to set the value. I'm going to hard code it in as 1500 here. I'm going to do the same on the wood resources. Very roughly put, and the reason why I'm going to explain it later is this will make no sense until you see the rest of it. If I don't do this, I'm going to end up with numbers that are significantly higher than they should be. So the next thing I'm going to do, and why this has to be run after list of all buildings has been updated, is I'm going to take my list of all my buildings, and I'm going to, or my list of constructed buildings, and I'm going to iterate a loop through this. So I'm going to do a for each loop through my list of constructed buildings. Even though I said I had a different name in my prep file for this, I just kind of paused because I went, that's not the right array. It is. And we'll put it in a category a little bit later. Okay, so I'm going to do something very, very similar, but with one key difference to what we did in the unit harvester. For those of you who are going to try to update this to a more object-oriented approach, this is part of the reason why you're going to want to do that, potentially. So I'm going to drag off my array element. I'm going to get class, and I'm going to do this twice, but what I'm going to pull off of the return value is going to be different. In fact, you might actually want to update the unit harvester to have a similar setup with what's coming off of here if you're not doing the object-oriented update challenge. If you are, it's not going to matter. It's going to be the same bit of code either way. All right, so I'm just going to duplicate my get class down here. Plug that on in. Now, what's going to be different here is I am going to do class is child of. So class is child of. And I'm going to do my industrial building master. Actually, I'm going to do my resource one first. So I'm actually going to break that, bring that down here, and plug that in. I could just renamed it, I realized. Or research. A new class of again. And on this one will be my resource manager, or resource building. Resource building master. Alright. Now, just like we did in the unit harvester, I'm going to do or. So if it's either one of these values. Now, to explain the difference between class is child of and what we did last time, which was equal to, this is returning a true value if it is a silo, or if we have another resource building. Let's say we create a foundry as a resource building. That'd be more industrial, I realize. But let's say we have a foundry as a resource building. So if it's either a silo or a foundry, then it will count. If we used what we did purely in the unit harvester, then only a silo will count as a resource management building. That will be the only one that gets brought in. Now, you might want it to be that only your factory has storage. So you could do equals down here, or you could do class of. You could do a combination of class of or equal to. It's up to you and what you want to do in your game. I'm just showing you another approach to what we did last time. All right, I'm going to drag off of here, and I'm going to do a branch. I'm going to plug that into there. And what we're going to do is we are going to lower this down just a fair... Actually, no, we're going to come off the bottom of this in a second. Ignore me just rambling myself. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag off this true and add unique. Looking really familiar, right? Remember what I said about functions. When you use a function, it should be something you can call multiple times from multiple areas as needed. Right now, I'm kind of really doing what a macro does. I'm creating the same set of code over and over again to do one thing. It's like having 10 factories to make 10 cars. So, I'm giving you more hints towards what the challenge is going to be, by the way. What we're going to do off this add unique is we're going to promote to local variable. And this will be resource buildings local. All right. So now we have a list of our resource buildings, but we still haven't set our max, which is what this is set out to do. So what we're going to do is off our completed. Let me just give us a little bit more room. We're going to move all of this up, and then we're going to move all of this over. Ooh, that was much more over than I meant for it to go. All right. So off our completed, we're going to do another loop. So we're going to do a for each loop. But we're going to run through this loop is our resource buildings local. Now, this is where things get a bit tricky and why we've done something like this up here. We are going to first highlight all of this, and we're going to copy it, Control W, down here. we're going to plug this array element into there, into that reroute that we just duplicated. And we're going to take these two values, the get class on the bottom, the get class is child of on the bottom, just drag them a little bit further down because we need a fair amount of room to do what we're about to do. All right, so what we're going to do is first we're going to drag off this loop body and we're going to create another branch. And we're also going to make sure it doesn't randomly vanish into, there we go. All right, so what we're going to do off of this branch is we're going to deal with the false first, which is to create another branch to go down here and to plug into there. We will do the top branch, and then we're just going to copy and paste the bottom branch. So the reason why I've duplicated this, instead of just running straight through this array and adding... So let me step back in a second and explain what's going to happen. The reason why I've duplicated both of these nodes, well, both pairs of these nodes down here, is each of the type of buildings that handle resources, be it a resource building master or be it an industrial building, the two types will add in a different max or a different change to the max resources we're allowed. So our resource master buildings or resource building masters will allow us to add 500 units to our max per building, whereas our RTS industrial building master will only allow us to add 250 units as a max per building. Outside of the default, we've set up 1500. And you might not even want that default. You might want to have that default as 0, which is completely fine. And then you just set everything else to 0 as well, including these two values. So if they have no resource buildings, then they can't store resources. That's completely fine. So what we're going to do up here, we're just going to duplicate down here and change out the number 500 for 250. So this is where it gets a bit complex, and again, why we have that at the start. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our max wood resource and we're going to set it on this true. And we need to come out a little bit away. And we are going to set this equal to the return of a float plus float plus float. The bottom number will be the value that the type of building is adding. Since this is our resource manager or resource building, we are adding 500 to our max. The next thing we're going to add is our default on this second pane here. So our default resource max of 1500 gets added in. And this is the confusing bit. We are going to do float minus float for this top part here. And what we're going to put into here is our max wood resource. We are going to take away from that our default resource max. So what this is doing, let's imagine that we have a map with one silo on it. A single silo is going to add 500. So we start the game, this runs. This comes to this point and goes, all right, I'm going to set my max wood resources. My default here is 1500 as set at the top there, by the way. So it takes 1500, it subtracts from that 1500. This gives us a value of 0. It adds 1500 back in, and then it goes, oh, I have a silo. I'm adding 500 to that, so that becomes 2000. A few minutes later, you've built another silo, and we're going to pretend that for a moment, neither of these are here. What's going to happen is it's going to come to this point. It's going to go, I need to update my max wood resource. My value currently is 2000. 2000 minus 1500 is 500. 500 plus our default value of 1500 is 2000. I have one building right now that is now 2000. It goes back through and goes, oh, I have another building. This value is now 2500. Subtract 1500. It's 1000. Add 1500 back in, it's 25,000 again, or 2500 again. Add 500, it's now 3,000, which is not what we want. We want it to be 2500. So to deal with that issue where this will go higher than what we need, we have to reset it at the start to 1500. So every time it comes in, it goes, oh, I'm 1,500. That, what is my current amount? Take it away, add in, and then keep repeating this throughout. As I said that, I think there actually might be a more efficient way than what I currently have. But I am not going to risk trying to get something that I haven't tested to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to just Control W this over here. We're going to plug the two sets together. We are then going to take our max OR resource, and we're going to change this over. So change that node to max OR and do the same down here. No, we do need that at the start. It's not more complex than it needs to be. I remember why I did it this way. So now we've taken care of our resource master buildings. Now we're going to do the same for our industrial building. So Control W, duplicate it down onto the next line, and attach it to the branch. Just all we're going to do now is change this to
250.
All right, so for those of you who are already a little bit more aware of object-oriented coding and programming, that is, you've probably already caught what I'm going to say to do. So what you're going to want to do is create a function that both the unit, harvester unit, and the player controller can use that creates this resource building local. What I would advise you to do is to create it inside of your function library. And you're going to pass in your controller reference, because you need to pass that in for the building list, the same way we have here. Now, there are other things you can do to make this more object-oriented in terms of good object-oriented practices, and go ahead and try those out. See what comes out of it. All right, so now that that's done, let's make sure this works. We have a silo in here from last time and a factory. So with our default value of 1,500, this should bring it to 2,000. This should bring it to 2,500. Now, we need to actually make this function run before we hit play. So to test it, and also leave in for the entire duration of a gameplay, off the event begin play, we are going to instantly set our max resources. So to do that, the first thing we're going to do is add that then for pin to our sequence. We are going to update our building list first. After we've updated our building list, we are going to set our max resources. And we're going to open this up just so we have it on screen. And then I'm going to hit play. I'm going to switch back to here. I'm going to turn my debugger on. The value I should see is 2,250. Just like I wanted. Again, because we have one silo. 1,500 plus 500 is 2,000 plus 250 is 2,250. So our max wood is right, and our max ore is also correct. If I construct another building, these will update correctly as well. I've tested it a couple of times. I'm not going to make you sit through watching me construct buildings randomly. If you have any issues with that, let me know though, because this is a bit confusing. And there are probably, as I said, there are probably more efficient ways to do this, but this is fairly efficient. All right, so the next bit we want to take care of is what happens when we bring resources to our buildings. So, actually, sorry, that's not true. What happens when we build a new building? We want to update our building list. And that's another reason why I couldn't demo it in front of you. It wouldn't have worked. Because we haven't told when we construct buildings yet to update our building list. So open up your building master. We don't need that. We don't need that. On your event graph at the end of the construction script. Even after the set material. This is like the only thing I'm going to put after the set material. I know how I harped about set material has to be last. Because it actually doesn't relate to the building. It relates to the player controller. We're going to get our player controller right after the set material. We are going to update our building list. Remember, if we don't update it, it's going to run with the list it initially has, or it's going to run with the list that's created if a unit is bringing resources to a building. And we're going to then, from there, we are going to set max resource. So every time a new building is constructed, we're going to do this. Now, you might want to make it so it doesn't set max resources for every building. That's up to you. You might only put this in buildings that are resource buildings, such as the industrial building or the silo. I would do so in the direct child of our building master. So in the industrial building master or in the resource building master. I would not do so directly in the parent. Sorry, I would not do so directly in the grandchild, which is a silo or factory. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to hit play. That's a force of habit. I meant to hit save. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to handle what happens when we bring resources to buildings and we've gone over our max resource. Also, you might have noticed that there is something wrong with how we currently handle harvesting resources. That is simply in there because I knew we were going to be handling it in this video, and we had to make a lot of changes to something we've already done. I'm not making changes in terms of taking things away this time. We are adding to, and just because of the sheer complexity of it, thought it was easier to handle that bug. And the bug, if you haven't noticed, is when you send a unit to harvest resources, it only resets the amount of resources in its current harvest. It doesn't reset so like we go to harvest wood, it resets the current wood harvest. It doesn't reset wood harvested though. So we're going to handle that in this video as well as the other stuff. And the reason why we're doing it together in this video is it's just simply easier to do it this part. So we don't need this. We need our deposit resources. And I can't make this look pretty without putting way too many reroutes in, so I apologize in advance. What we're going to do is we are going to grab all of this, all of it. We're just going to move this way over here for a bit. That's way too much. Move that way over there. Okay, so I'm just going to add a rerouting because I know I'm going to need a reroute. I'm going to just break down to that reroute there, though. And I'm going to reset my wood real quick, just so I don't forget. So it's wood harvested. This needs to be 0 now. And now we're going to continue on. I'm just going to put a branch here, because I know I'm going to need a branch in a minute. And I'm not going to plug anything back in quite yet. I'm going to break this. And I'm going to not break that for now, but I'm going to put a branch in here as well. I am, however, going to take everything on the bottom here, and I'm just going to move it downwards. I have a bit of room to play with. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to check if we add what we've harvested to our resources, are we going over the max? If we are not, then we are going to do what we normally did, what we did in the last video. We're just going to add it straight in. If we are, we're going to add in a different number. So let's handle first checking if we're going over that number. So what we're going to do is we are going to go to our player controller here. We're going to drag this reroute up here as well, because we do need it near that branch. We are going to get our max wood resource. We are going to check if this value is greater than or equal to this value. So, greater than, equal to. We are going to need a fair bit more room than I actually thought. Okay, drag that out that way. If it is equal to or less, so if the value is greater than or equal to our wood resource plus our wood harvested, then we want to add in as we normally have. So that's just going to be our true. And let's finish setting this up. What we're going to do is we're going to bring these backwards a bit. We're going to actually put a reroute in at some point in here. So let's just bring these forward just so it's a bit easier already. There we go. All right, so I can put a reroute into here. So again, is our max limit greater than what we're going to add to it? If it is, then just add it in. If it isn't, I'm going to Control W this down here. we want to go into the false. Our target is still the same target, but instead what we're going to do, and let's just put another reroute in here to make this a little bit neater. So we're going to come off of here, off our max wood resource, and we're going to set our wood resources to our max. So if we are going to exceed our maximum, we're going to set our wood resource to its max. We are going to then come through either on the true or false. So that's why we're going to plug the false. So we come off the set on the false. We're going to plug into that reroute. After that, we're just going to reset our wood harvested to 0 so that this value here is 0. And then we're going to continue on. So we're going to then we're going to repeat the same process for our ore. Again, I know this looks really complex, so let's walk through it one more time. So for our ore, we are going to, we're going to take all of these three. We're going to drag them back this way first off. There we go. We're going to drag that forward slightly. We are going to get our max ore resource. We are going to check, is our max ore resource limit, is the amount we're allowed to have, equal to or greater than what we're attempting to put into it. All right, is it equal to or greater than what we're attempting to put into it? Put a reroute there, plug that in. Let's just move this around a tiny bit so it's a bit easier to read. Plug the conditional statement into there. If we have room to add more resources, if we're not going to exceed our max limit for our ore, then we just want to add it in as we normally did in the last video. So that's our true. Again, we're going to control W this down here as our false. And we're going to set the value, if it's false, to be, let me just move this up here so it's actually on the same line, to be equal to our max ore resource. And put another reroute in so I can just move things around to be a bit easier to read. And again, what we're going to do, we're going to break from this return node actually. We are going to put a set ore harvested back down to 0. Again, we'll put a reroute into this so that we can do the same when we come off the false. So no matter if it's true or false that we're exceeding our limits, we go through every process to get to the end, thus resetting our ore and wood harvested. So let's test this out now. What we're going to do, we have, I've got to set the target on this. So make sure to set your target. There you go. Compile. What we're going to do before we test it is, you notice we set our max inventory to 1 in the last video. I never reset it. Potentially did that. We are going to do something similar now. We've already changed the value in our main game UI for this down to, I think, 50. We're now going to change it to not 198. So, I don't know why I opened that up. It's in our player controller. Go to your player controller. Find your wood resource and set it to 1,998. So that means we'll have 2 goes. What we're going to do is we're going to add a breakpoint to this deposit resources. So add breakpoint, and I'm going to hit. Wait, before you hit play, I made a mistake. Let's go back to our player controller. I was thinking of my test file where I only have a silo on the screen, which would make that, 2,000 is our max. Our max is 2,250. So we want to set this to 2 units lower than that. So that's going to be 2,248. Compile. Now hit play. And so I'm going to send the unit to the building, or to the tree there. And then when it's done with the tree, as it's harvesting, I'm going to pause and I'll resume the video when we hit that breakpoint. If on the second go of this, you find that your unit is instantly going back to the building, then you're not resetting a couple of your variables correctly, and I'll show you which ones in a second. So that's it. I'm going to pause the video. I'll see you when the unit's done harvesting. Alright, as you can see, we've hit our first breakpoint. The unit's moved to the building. We can no longer see it. So let's go in and step through. So we go in. We should be slightly over 2,249. Oh, wow, we actually hit it exactly on. I'm used to being over by a small amount on the decimal there. Alright, so we're going to then go directly into setting to 2,249. And then we'll reset our wood harvested. If on your second go it comes back instantly as being done, that you're not resetting your wood harvested, or if you're doing ore, you're not resetting your ore harvested back to 0. Or one of the variables we reset back to 0 in the last video. So that's done. Let's resume. We'll go back here. We'll release the unit. I'll send her to this tree this time. And again, I'll pause the video. Once it's done harvesting resources and we hit that breakpoint, I'll resume the video. Alright, so we've just hit the next breakpoint. See, the unit's already vanished in. Let's see if we actually got an equal number this time. Alright, we have an exactly equal number, so it's going to bring us over. So we're going to do this a third time. Sorry, in my test file where I have 2,000, it does go slightly over. Alright, so we'll just resume. I'll release a unit. We'll do it a third time, and we should see that it won't bring in more resources. You also know since we're only going 2 decimals now, it's not updating this to 2.25. We might want to add more decimals out. We want to go 2 decimals when it's this far. But since we can see the values that we're currently getting inside our blueprints by debugging, it's not a huge deal. Alright, so I'm going to pause the video, and I'll see you when we hit the next breakpoint. Alright, so we've just hit our next breakpoint. Let's step through, and our value should now be, we're 1 over, so this should return a false, and we should set our max back to what it's currently at, which means we are now wasting the resources the person has brought in, because we set it back to 0 here. So that takes us through handling our max resources, bringing our resources to the building. And yes, there are ways you can improve upon this. Again, I'm just showing you the logic. So if you like what we're doing, if you like this series so far, make sure to hit that like button down below. Make sure to hit that subscribe and notification icon so you know when the next tutorial is out. And I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. Also, as always, I hope that you have a wonderful day.